development, and we'll start with the basics of HTML, and then we'll look at CSS, and then go into introduction to JavaScript, and then hopefully by the end of the course you guys are able to build your own one-page websites with 3 sections. The first one telling us something about yourself. You can add an image with that. The second one kind of saying what you would like to continue or how you like to deepen your knowledge. And then the third one would be like a mini project that you showcase your JavaScript skills with. So before we continue with the class, let's just make sure that everybody has these items. Everybody has these items on their checklist. So if you have a Gmail account, and you can access this website called playcode.io. If you don't have a Gmail account, you need to create a Gmail account. But if you do have a Gmail account, you can just go straight to this website, preferably on a Chrome browser, and then you can immediately start like writing your code on there. So normally, as professional developers, most of our where we write our code kind of looks like this. You have this side project that has your files. So right now in this folder, in the HTML folder, I've got the index.html file, and then the JavaScript folder, which is the script.js file, and then the CSS folder, which is the style.css file. And then we have this library, which we'll not be covering in this course because that's for like more advanced topics into introduction to web development. But I think what we're going to be using as well are the assets where we can like put in pictures or videos into our website that we want to build. So in this panel here, this is where we can write our code either in the HTML file, CSS file, or JavaScript file. This panel here is where we see the result of what we're writing here. And this console is just an environment that we can use to print out information back to us as a developer, just to give us feedback or a way of debugging our code if something went wrong. So if you have your account, you can sign in now. So if you just click on that sign in button, you should normally see this pop up. And so if you click on continue with Google, it will take you to another tab. And then when you have your account, you can just choose one account, and then that's going to then redirect you back to the playcode.io website. And so now I'm signed in, and you can see at the bottom here I've got my image and then my username. So now, this is great, we can start writing our code. So let's go back to the slides now that you've got everything sorted. So starting with HTML basics. So what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's a language that is used to lay the foundation or the structure of your website. So we're going to be learning about the basic syntax of HTML and how building a static page, and then some exercises and some resources for more learning at the end of the class. So like we said, HTML is a standard markup language for the web. You can use it to create your own website. You can essentially think about it as the bare bone of every website. So how does the structure look like? So in every HTML file, it starts with a doc type. And so after that doc type, we've got the root element, which is the HTML element, and then the head element, and then we have the title. Inside this head element, we can have other descriptions of our web page, like metadata that like gives the browser more information about your page and what the page does. You then also have the body, which is so everything inside the body is what is then displayed to your user, what is then displayed on the browser for people to look at. Why things are inside the head and all the HTML and doc, they don't really like show. These are just like ways of us structuring the website and giving it some of the information that the browser needs in order to make sure that it stands out on the web in general. So HTML is made up of elements, and so each element does a specific thing. So now we've got the body element, which like I said makes our content visible, and then we've got the div elements, and which div elements they start with an opening tag and then an ending tag with this slash, and then we've got the header element and then the p tag. So this header element, if you're reading a book or if you're reading an article, they all have a header, and then under that header they have a paragraph. So this is what we just have here. If we were to go in depth into what elements look like, they all start with an opening tag and then the content of which you want to display, and then the closing tag. But not all elements have an open and closing tag. Some of them do, some of them don't. And so for example, we can have the break tag, which gives spaces between one element and the next element, and then the image element as well. It doesn't have a closing start tag. It doesn't have a closing tag. It's just like one opening tag, and then you can put your content inside that one opening tag. So with the images, elements also have things called attributes. These provide additional information about the HTML element. So an attribute can be specified in the stats tag, and they normally come as name and value pairs. So for example, remember when we said that the image doesn't have an opening and closing tag? This is an example where we can have that image source. So src is an example of an attribute. So it's describing that this image requires a link to where it can upload an image from. So I've given the source of that image, and then we can give it a width and a height. Although not really advisable, it's advisable to style the size of your images in your CSS file instead. And then we can also give it a description of our image, just in case we have people that cannot see come onto our website, and they'll be able to have an idea of what that picture is, even if they cannot see it. So it's always good to leave a helpful description. There are types of elements. They are block elements and they're inline elements. So block elements, what's interesting about them is that they always try to take up the width of the page. So if you declare a block element in your HTML, they will always try to fill up from the start of your page to the end of your page. So that's one thing with block elements. And then inline elements go in between some other elements, like our p paragraph element. We can put emphasis on one of the words in our paragraph, or italics, or we can make it big, or bold or small, or we can put a span, which we can then decide to do something else with. So that's just one major difference between block elements and inline elements. So moving forward, we also have documenting in HTML. So if you're writing your code and you would like to put in some helpful comments, so that whenever you come back to it, you can just read through your comments and then you're able to pick up your code from when you left it. So this is how you add your comments. You start with an opening bracket, exclamation, double dash, and then the comment, and then 2 double dashes, and then the closing the comments as well. So if you don't have this closing tag there, this part of our code is going to be coded out, and then we will not see a paragraph displayed. So our comments do not show on the website, it's just there to help us to read what our code is doing at that point in time. So now let's jump into an exercise. For every HTML element, it starts with a doc type, and then we write HTML, and then the root file, which is that. Here we're just denoting that we want our web page to be in English. Remember when I said we could add attributes to an element to give it more of a description. So the HTML element comes with an attribute called lang, and so we can pass in en to say that we want our page to be rendered in English. And then the header tag, where we can put in things like the title of our page. And I think the title that we're going to give this now is Learning Web Development, or Introduction to Web Development. and then we can add other things as well, but for right now that's probably a very important attribute to have in the header. And so if we come into the body, like I mentioned before, this is where we can add this is where the content that we add here can then be displayed on our view panel. So if we add a div, which is what I mentioned can be containers to group specific elements on our page, and we have the first div, which is an introduction to ourselves. So if I put a h1 tag here, and h1 tag, and I say introduction myself, you can see that as I'm typing, this shows there, but normally sometimes you just run the file on your browser and then it shows, but because we're using this website, it just automatically shows what we're doing on our HTML file. So this is a bit dark. Another attribute that we can put to any element is a style attribute, but because we're not yet looking at CSS, just to make it a bit bright so everyone can see what I'm doing, then I'm going to add a style attribute to the body, and I'm going to say the background color should be white, so you can see. So that's now like popped and I can see everything I'm doing. When we start doing CSS, instead of putting the style here, we can just put it in the CSS file instead. So we've got our container, we've got our introduction to myself header. We can then put a paragraph, so writing a short paragraph about yourself. So you can put anything you want. My name is Omotola, and I am a software engineer. And you can add more information, whatever you feel like describes who you are as a person, your likes and your dislikes, etc. But I think I'll just end it there so we don't like keep on typing unnecessarily. So that's our paragraph. I can just increase that just to give us more items, so that it's just a lot of things to write. So spaces does not matter, so anyhow you format it, it doesn't matter, because how it's going to be rendered, it's just going to it's not going to be rendered how I wrote it here. You can see that each thing is just back to back to each from the last line. So what else can we add to here? I think we've got other elements like so for the h1 tags, we've got h1 tags to h6, so we've got h2 tags. So this is who I am. So you can see that's smaller than the h1 tag. We've got h3, we've got up to h6, so we can add a h6 there. And then it says introducing myself, and it's still bold, but then it's like really small. So just depending on what you want to do, maybe you want like a subheading or something, you can check between h1 and h6 to then add a header to a paragraph. So we also have the image element, which has an attribute called source. We can add a link to our image there. We also have an attribute called alt, which I said before is used to describe what our image is. And then we can add the width and then the height of our image. So why don't we add an image to this so that we can see what we're doing. So I'll go on to add an image. I need to go to my assets folder, click on the plus button, and then if I go into my device, I can then pick in a picture and then open it. So it should load up that picture, and then it's now inside there. So let me see if I can rename this. I can't rename it here. Actually, I renamed it outside. But if I want to access my picture, what I can just say is assets, which is the name of the file. So let me see if I spelled that right. I didn't. So assets slash 20 200 to 15 dash 135432.jpg. So that's the file. So now you can see that, look at how huge that file is. Obviously it's covered the whole screen. I can just say this is an image of Omotola, and if I go down here, I can see that I just want it to be 500 pixels by 500 pixels. It's still a bit large. I can bring it down to 200 and 200 here, so it's just a bit right. So let's just say I want to take this element and then put it at the top, so it's at the top. So maybe after introducing myself, then I have my picture there, so it's there instead. So you can see that also one thing with the structure is it's how you put it together that it renders when you're just using HTML. But when we start using CSS, you can see that we can then put the elements on different parts of our page. So now what is next? We also talked about the break tag, which we can just use to give space between two paragraphs. So if I put another paragraph here, then that should give me a bit of space. If that space wasn't there, if that break tag wasn't there, you can see how close it is, but when I put the break tag, it just gives me a bit of space. We also looked at some block elements. So we've used a block element, which is a div, h2 is also a block element. If I was to inspect this, remember how I said the block elements try to fill as much space as possible. And so if I look at this, you can see how that h2 just goes from the beginning of that to the end of where the page ends. So that's what block elements try to do. They take up the whole space, while like inline elements, I think a paragraph is also a block element as well. Let's look at some inline elements. So for example, in our second paragraph, if we wanted to make software engineer have more emphasis, we can just put em in between there, another one here, and we can see that our software engineer here has a bit of emphasis. If we go and inspect it, so our inline elements can go into our block element. You can see that it only like takes up the space in which we're given it. It doesn't try to like fill up everything. What else? If we want to make my name to be bold, for example, strong, come back here and put another one, strong for bold. You can see that my name here is now bold. So you can do lots of things. I think I put quite a few of them on the slides. You can look at that and you can play with that and see what you want to come up with. Another element I've looked at earlier, so if I put another heading that says h3, let's use an h3 tag, and I say things that I like, and then we have ordered list and unordered list. So an ordered list is a numbered list. It normally has numbers for the lists, and then inside an ordered list we have LIs, which we can then write out what we want to be inside that list. So I like to code, and then you can put another one saying I like to travel, and you can put another one saying I like to read. I like to read, and so that just shows you the things that I like in an ordered list, because I have got 1, 2, 3. That shows is an ordered list. So if we wanted an unordered list, which is just a bullet point of this type of list, We can put that down here and change that element to UL. And so you can see now that's now a bullet point instead of the way it was before. So it's depending on how you want your list to look like. I think another thing that we can do is we can also create a link. So if you wanted to link to a different part of a different website, so go to Google and we put in our P tag there, and then we say we want to make Google clickable. We can wrap that in an A tag. Let's put another A tag here, and the A tag has an attribute called href, and with this href you can then say, okay, let's try and get Google's let's try and get Google's URL. So if I copy that and then I go back to where I was coming from and put that here, then it should have the website. So where am I writing this? So look at go to Google is there. Immediately I added href, it became purplish. And so if we don't want it to open in this tab because we don't want to not save our work, we can say targets, and then equals to blank. So that means if I click on this link, that page is going to open up in another tab. So if I just go on Google, you can see that it's opening in this different tab here. So we'll just wait for that to open so that we can see that yes, our link is actually working. Let's close this one. So while that's loading, so you can see that we are able to come to Google now. So these are just like a number of things that you can do to build your website. You can have another div that does something different. So I can put, because I have one div that has all of this, I can put another div for my second section just to say, okay, I'm doing something else here. I'm talking about something else here. So you can create what you want. And that's how you go. You just use divs to structure the elements on your page and for it to look better. So I put in some reference material which I've shared in the Slack channel. So look at that and just kind of add more things to your website as you go. And I'm sure by the time you finish going through it by yourself, it will be very straightforward. Thank you.